10 years ago, the world's governments pledged in Dakar that every child in the world would have access to education by 2015. Today, we are facing a global crisis in education, and we're on the brink of breaking this important promise. According to the Global Monitoring Report on Education for All 2010, much has been achieved, and there have been some spectacular advances in education over the past decade. But the world is definitely off track as regards the Dakar goals. There are still 72 million children out of school, and progress to put these children into school has slowed. Poverty is obviously one of the major causes of children being left behind in education. And governments are failing to reach the poorest and most marginalized sections of society, children living in remote areas, child laborers, ethnic minorities, and young girls. Another major setback which threatens the education for all goals is the financial crisis. In many of the world's poorest countries, the progress that has been made could stall or even be thrown into reverse. The report considers that the aftershock of the financial crisis is creating a lost generation of children, denying them the opportunity for schooling that could give them a chance for a better future. The report estimates that even if the world's poorest countries increase domestic spending on education, there is an annual financing gap of $16 billion, whereas the report estimates only $4 billion in additional aid has been mobilized by the rich countries in response to the crisis.
The international response to the financial crisis has really been inadequate, and it poses a threat to continued progress in education. That's a tiny fraction of what has been spent on bailing out banks in rich countries, but it's also a tiny fraction of what some of the world's poorest countries stand to lose.
Despite the scale of the problem, the message of the report is that it can be solved, and the promises made to the world's children can be kept. To further governments' efforts to improve education, the report identifies 3 key areas. Governments can make education more affordable, more accessible. They can scrap school fees, build schools nearer the communities, and provide transport. They can improve the quality of education by investing in teachers and books. They can incorporate education into broader policies to combat poverty and to reach the most marginalized.
If you go back to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, what that establishes is that education is a right for all people. It doesn't say it's a right for all people contingent on the wealth of their parents, the colour of their skin, the language they speak, or where they happen to live. And what we're arguing in this report is that it's time for governments to live up through practical policies to the underlying principles of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights.
We know where we're going, and we know where we want to be. Where we are going is towards a situation where 56 million children who could be in school in 2015 will be out of school. Governments have to prioritise reaching marginalised people. Aid donors have to stick to their pledge of 10 years ago. Then we can be on track and keep the promise. Education for all by 2015.